Hello again, my cherubs. So this is the last subtopic in this little part of physics, all right? And it's on irradiation contamination. So what we're going to look at today is how to reduce the risks associated with working with radioactive sources, because there are inherent risks involved. Now, the risks centralise around the fact that ionising radiation is able to damage living cells or living tissues, and that can be on a kind of cellular and DNA level, which can lead the cells to becoming cancerous, or it can directly kill them. All right. So that's why it's important that you know the precautions to take when working with any sources of radiation. Alpha, beta, and gamma, you need to know which is most dangerous inside and outside of the body and how to reduce the risks. Okay, now there are some key terms that we need to talk about, all right, and that's essentially irradiation and contamination, because there is a difference between the two. Okay, if objects are near a radioactive source, they are irradiated by it. This simply means that they are exposed to the radiation. Irradiating something does not make it radioactive, and it does not turn you into a superhero. So my apologies for that. Now then, keeping sources in lead-lined boxes, standing behind barriers, having the sources in a completely different room, using remote control arms to handle them. These two are obviously in industry, we wouldn't use these in school, but we do in, if we get these sources out, so obviously if we were in school at the moment, we do have some sources in school, but they are kept in lead-lined boxes, and I would keep you a good distance away from them so you wouldn't be irradiated or exposed to those sources in any way. I would also wear gloves, goggles, and a lab coat, okay, and we'll talk more about why I've circled that in a minute. All right, so keeping sources in lead-lined boxes, standing behind barriers is just a common way of reducing the effect of irradiation, and these are more industrial, because in school I wouldn't have you in a different room and I wouldn't be using remote control arms, because the sources that we have aren't as irradiating or don't have as much activity as other sources do. Now then, I would also be wearing gloves, goggles, and a lab coat. Now, what that does is actually reduces contamination. Okay, so there's a difference between irradiation and contamination. So just to recap, irradiation is when you're simply exposed to the radiation. Okay, contamination is when those radioactive atoms get onto or into an object. Okay, the cat's at it again, do ignore him. All right, so the object is said to be contaminated. So, for example, if I touched the radioactive source without wearing gloves, my hands would become contaminated. And these contaminating atoms might then decay, releasing radiation which could cause me harm. So contamination is especially dangerous because radioactive particles could get inside the body. So if I wasn't wearing gloves and I handled the substance, say it was period 4, just before lunch, and then I didn't wash my hands and I just went straight into the break room and I started eating my sandwich or eating my lunch or eating my crisps or whatever, there are then radioactive atoms, there's contamination on my fingers that are now inside my body. Okay, and that can be quite dangerous, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So I would also probably use tongs to remove the sample from the lead-lined box that it was in. As well, just to kind of like double up the protection, but it's just to avoid particles getting stuck to my skin or under my nails. Now, in industry, you might get workers wearing full protective suits with breathing apparatus, and that is to prevent them from breathing in any airborne particles, any airborne radioactive particles as well. All right, now then, the seriousness of the seriousness of the irradiation and the seriousness of the contamination depends entirely on the source and whether the source is internal or external. So just kind of briefly, outside the body, beta and gamma are the worst type of sources, or the most dangerous, and inside the body it is alpha. Okay. So, contamination or radiation can cause different amounts of harm based on the type that it is. So, like I've just said, outside the body, these are the most dangerous. And that's because they can penetrate the body and get to our delicate cells and organs inside. Because remember, alpha is stopped by the skin, okay? Whereas beta, it takes aluminium, and gamma, you're looking at lead. You're looking at a couple of feet of lead or 6 feet of concrete, all right? So the penetrating power of these types of radiation is what causes the damage. So alpha is less dangerous because it can't penetrate the skin and it's easily blocked by a small air gap. Okay, so it doesn't travel that far in air. Now, high levels of irradiation from all sources are dangerous, but especially beta and gamma. Okay, now inside the body, alpha is most dangerous because they can do all their damage in a very, very, very small area, a very localized area. So contamination rather than irradiation is the major concern when working with alpha sources. Beta sources are less damaging inside the body as the radiation is absorbed over a wider area because it's not kind of bouncing around in that small area, because it can actually get out of the body and out of the skin, if that makes sense. Gamma sources are the least dangerous because they mostly pass straight out and they have the lowest ionizing power. If you are confused about what ionizing power is, and when we're talking about ionizing radiation, watch the lesson from a couple of, I think two or three lessons back, where I was looking at what it means to be ionizing. All right. Now, the more we understand about how different types of radiation affect the body, the better we can protect ourselves when using them. Okay, so this is why it's so important that research about this is published, and why we are allowed to research on the uses and the dangers of radiation. Now, this is really, really important because this is kind of like one line of the specification that's tagged in, okay, to this topic. And I'm always wary of these topics. I've talked to you about this before with Chadwick. Okay, Chadwick, when we looked at the structure of the atom. All right, there's one line in the specification about Chadwick, and they made a 4-mark question on the guy. Okay, which is why I'm always very nervous about this. So I'm going to tell you this now, and I need you to commit this to memory. Okay, now then. It's important that we research, and it's important that these things are published. Now, when data is published, it is peer-reviewed. P-E-E-R, peer-reviewed. What this means is that other scientists have looked at the data and have said, yes, this is a good piece of research. It is not biased in any way. And then it is published. And then that means that it can quickly become accepted if it is peer-reviewed and given the big green tick. Yes, this is a good piece of research. Yes, this is working. It means it can quickly become accepted and lead to many improvements. Okay, in not just the use of radioactive sources, but in anything in science. Okay, so remember that peer review is important because it means that any ideas or any research that comes along can be quickly become accepted, and then any new knowledge can be implemented in improving anything to do with science. Okay, right, I am going to leave it there. That is literally it. So this would have been a bit of a chalk and talk lesson for me if we were in school. All right, so I'm going to put work up as usual. Okay, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.